Welcome to Radical Feminist Perspectives. Today, I need to turn this off. There we are. So today we are going to look at the book Daughters of Agalia, which is also called Agalia's Daughters, and it's by Gerd Brantenberg. It's going to be discussed by me, Jo Brew, and Lierre Keith, and we're going to have an introduction by Tonje Gjevjon, who interviewed Gerd Brantenberg for one of her books and is in touch with her, which is just completely fantastic. So welcome today. I guess everybody is, you can do chat and put questions if you have any questions into the Q&A. And I'll get started on the book, and then I'll get Tonje and Lierre to come on. So the book, Agalia's Daughters, it's published first in 1977 in Norwegian, and it's written by Gerd Brantenberg, and it was translated into English and came out in English in the 1980s. And since in a range of different, it's been reprinted, so it's widely available and many people read it. So this is the contents page, which just gives you an overview of the book. It's a novel, and it's around Bram, who is she's a director. She's the sort of queen bee, the most powerful woman in the novel. It's around her and her son, Petronius, who you can see as you go through the book. Petronius reaches his 16th birthday, and there's the idea that he wants to be a seaworm. He wants to be a sailor, and it tells the story of his struggle against the oppression, because he's living in a very bad patriarchy, which is really similar, but just a role reversal, a systematic role reversal of patriarchy. So the matriarchy is oppressing Petronius, and you hear the story from Petronius's view, what his life is like. So I'll stop sharing and get. Now we've got Tonje, and I'll also get Lierre on. So welcome, Tonje. You have been in touch with Gerd and know her or met her. Can you tell us about the book and tell us about Gerd and tell us the stories that you know about her?
Yes, it was when I was making the book We Ate, Slept and Drank Feminism, together with Inge Aas, who is actually the daughter of Berit Aas. And then I met a lot of feminists from the 70s, and one of them was the famous writer, Gerd Brantenberg. And when she talked about the incident that gave her the idea to the book Egalias Døtre, which is like the Norwegian, how you spell the Norwegian title, she started by saying she understands very well why it takes time to tell about Me Too experiences. And I have tried to translate what she said, and I apologize if some of it got lost in the translation, but here we go. So it was a beautiful summer day, and Gerd Brantenberg walked towards the subway, and in the opposite direction comes a man. As they passed each other, this man stretched out his arm and grabbed her breasts and said, "Do you have breasts?" And in a second, that lovely summer day just faltered, and Gerd, she didn't respond. She just continued walking, felt her heart pounding, and thought, how on earth is it possible that an idiot just in seconds can ruin my good mood and a nice summer day because of something so stupid? And then another thought occurred. What if we lived in a society where I, or any other woman, passed a completely random man on the street, and the moment we passed each other, I grabbed his crotch and asked, "Do you have a dick?" Yes, that was a good idea. And then she went home to her student dormitory where she lived and wrote the first chapter of a book about a society where the women have the power and oppress the men, and where the women also make the kind of advances and actions that are part of that kind of patriarchy. And in the draft, the first draft, Gerd Brantenberg let a very normal man named Per wake up in a ditch, not knowing where he is. And then he starts walking towards an unknown town or a city, and he is quite confused, sits down on a bench and notices that all those who look like women are wearing similar clothes, while those who appears like men, looks like men, are wearing multicolored clothes and strange shoes that is painful to walk in. And then two of these women sits down on the bench where Per are sitting, leans towards him and asks in a condescending tone, "Are you going to get anything tonight, little boy?" And Per understands even less. So that's what she wrote when she got home from the incident, and this draft she called Feminapolis. And that idea did not leave her, and when some time had passed, she told her mother, who was fallen ill, about the idea. And Gerd had a really good relationship with her mother, and says it was always a joy to come home and tell her what she had experienced. So she told her mother that she had an idea for a book, and that the book was called Feminapolis. She explained the concept to her mother, and then her mother had a good laugh. And while they stood there together looking out the window, which Norwegians do a lot, the mother said to Gerd, "Yes, Gerd, write that book." And Gerd's mother was a housewife, and but also a trained actress. But she gave up the actress part when she was pregnant with Gerd. And Gerd's mother didn't like housework, and the only thing she liked about being a housewife was the children. And with the children, she used her many talents. So Gerd grew up with a mother who should have been much more than a housewife, and sees her mother's faith in that life. And Gerd's mother died at the age of 47 when Gerd was 23, and it was not long after that it became a thought in Gerd's life that she had promised her mother that she would write that book. And when she started to work on the book, she thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to include Per, the very normal man, because there shouldn't be any consciousness in this book about any other society than the one we live in now, the completely normal Agalia, where the women have the power and claim that there is equality. So out goes Per, and in comes the masculinist Petronius, who becomes Brantenberg's hero, and who is 14 years old in the beginning of the book, and frustrated that he must go to a ball and hope that some woman casts her eyes on him. Then she wrote the beginning of the book with the mother of Petronius, who has a high position in the capital of Agalia, and who sits reading the newspaper and then says to Petronius, and this is like the first line in the book, "It is after all men who gets children. But I want to become a sailor or sailoress. I'll just take the kid with me," Petronius replies. Because at the time, Brantenberg says, that's what we were told. After all, it is women who give birth to children, which meant that then we had to take care of them and all the other consequences that followed. And this was also what became Gerd Brantenberg's mother's faith in life. Looking after the children, doing all the housework and everything else that belonged to childcare. So instead of saying it is after all women who give birth to children, and if it is so, instead Brantenberg thought that we should say it is after all women who give birth to children, and if it is so terribly important, which it is, otherwise humanity will die out, then it should also be the women who have the power. Brantberg says Egalia's Daughters is primarily a satire and a parody of the current conditions, but it's also to some extent an utopia. The book has elements of dystopia and utopia in it because there is a lot here that is worth criticizing, because she had to make the women in Agalia as objectionable as she thinks the men in male society are, and give the women the same privileges men have. Brantberg thinks it's worse in our society, Norway, which is like Egalia, than it is in Agalia. She says the feminists who have read the book have said many times, is it really as bad as in Egalia? And after what... is it really as bad as in Agalia? And they find that it is, and that it actually is even worse. And that's what Brantberg thinks the Me Too movement shows, because stories comes up. And the little episode that set it all in motion that summer day shows that women, especially young women, are exposed to often older men, like that idiot that summer day who thought he could just do what he did without any consequences. So this is this is what she told in the interview, and this is what I have to say.
Thank you so much. And now I need to get my add my video. That's fantastic. It's a real joy to hear from you and hear sort of semi-directly or through you from Gerd about why she wrote this novel. It's such a fantastic novel and really, really interesting. And hopefully we'll be in touch with her more. And if she's written other books, we might be able to get her to come and discuss other books and this book. But there wasn't time today because she's not available, and you only heard about it. So what we'll do now is we're going to go on to what we're planning to do, which is Lierre and I are going to talk about the book and what's in the book, and then we'll get you back on, Tonje, towards the end to give some of your insights of what you think about it. So I'm going to now bring in Lierre. So Lierre, there's a quote you've got, or maybe just tell us first of all why you like the book, and then tell me when you want me to put the quote up.
I read this book in, I think, 1990. And the edition I have came out in 1985. And it was put up by Seal Press. But I bought this book at a really wonderful women's bookstore that was called Southern Sisters. And they were in the southeastern United States, in Raleigh, North Carolina, or that area, the Triangle area, it's called. And they had this incredible bookstore. It was this huge Victorian house that was 3 stories, just this beautiful, beautiful old house. And the whole bottom floor was the books. And then they had all these meeting rooms and all this stuff going on. So it was like a women's center, women's bookstore. And it was run by Cookie Tear, who's still a wonderful radical feminist. And I got to go there, and then she recommended this book. So we bought it. It was me and my girlfriend. We bought this book and we read it out loud while we were traveling. We just laughed. I mean, this book is hysterical, besides being quite serious. But I hadn't thought about it since then. I'd never reread it. And I found this really funny little bookmark in the in the book. And the thing that was so funny to me about rereading it was that in the book, so like in English, there's men and there's women, and it always feels like, okay, so men is the standard, and then you add a little something and you get women. And so she flips the linguistics of it. So women are called, wom is singular and wim is the plural. And then men are called menwim, right? So she's got it flipped so that the sort of the phenome of whim is the standard. And we started using that. And to this day, I will still say, hey, you whims, or you whim. And then when anybody says you guys, I go, no, you whim. And I completely forgot this is where I got that.
And that's actually
decades.
I was, as I was rereading it and having a laugh and loving it, thinking there are so many words in the translation into English, but there's so many fantastically useful words which are empowering or liberatory by using those words, and it's so clever. They reveal so much about patriarchy as well, so that almost every page. So yes, maybe we can start using the language of Daughters of Agalia much more,
Well, I
because
hope that
they're
she
very
gets to
useful
hear
words.
this, because I've been
Yeah,
doing this for decades, and I didn't remember this was where I didn't make it up. I didn't know where I'd gotten it. I've just been doing it forever, and this is where it came from. I realized, like on page 3, I was like, this is where we got that. So
yeah.
anyway, it makes a huge, difference when these books just, they percolate into your mind, and then you have a whole different framework. So anyway,
And this is a very special one, I think.
it is, yeah,
It's very moving, and it
yeah,
reveals a lot. Yeah. Shall I put your first slide
yeah.
up?
Go ahead, let's do slides.
There we are.
Then so this is so the boys are oppressed, the men are oppressed, and this is the Petronius, who's the sort of the main protagonist, and he's talking his father. He's having a little chat with his dad, Christopher. So this is like a teenage girl talking to her mom, essentially. And they had this huge thing every year called the Maid Man's Ball. So all the young boys have to go to this event, and they may or may not be chosen by an adult whim to go off and have sex in a room. And so they have to display themselves, and they get special outfits and all this. And so it's sort of like a coming of age ritual where they may have their first sexual experience, but it's a huge deal in their lives. Everything revolves around this. So his father is explaining to him, then there's something you and I will have to talk about before you go to the maidmen's ball. No womb will go to bed with a man womb who isn't clean and neat and nice smelling, you know. It's very important. Wash yourself thoroughly down there and spray a bit of my rose petal spray around your penis and shame bag. And I just had to laugh out loud when I read that. Like, that's his scrotum, of course, but like, this is just dropped into the conversation that they have this, it's just built into the language that, of course, men's bodies are gross and disgusting. And you would, of course, naturally call this a shame bag. So it doesn't
And
smell bad.
absolutely, I mean, the great thing is it's very healing for us as women, because
Yeah,
rather than just reading, oh, it's really awful that they call our bodies dirty and they say we're dirty with menstruation, by this being done to men, one, you feel a bit indignant for them, you feel sorry for them, and it's also funny because it's being done, it's sort of schadenfreude, it's being done back to them. But I think it really heals the horrors that are done to us all the
yeah,
time, by seeing how you can see it more clearly when
yeah,
it's
from the
reversed like
outside.
this.
Yeah, absolutely. So then he shudders at the disasters that would befall him if he didn't keep his tassel clean. And like, how does, I mean, every woman must be able to relate to this. Like, oh, what if I bleed through my clothes when I'm on my period? Like the horrors that, we go through. And um, just the levels of shame that especially non-feminist women go through, but they don't even realize that this is not normal to feel that way about your body. So she does a very good job here, but that I just laughed
Yeah.
out loud even the second time reading it, that thing about the shame bag.
Yeah, I'll go on
So
to the
yeah,
next one. So I've got the quote up here saying, after all, it's men whim. That's so you can see the writing of this is the plural men, but they've men whim, they're called, who beget children, said Bram, throwing her son. This is the beginning of the novel, a reproving glance over the top of Egels and Post. So it's the equal society, which is sort of pretty much socialist, like Scandinavian socialist, I suppose, from the 70s. That sort of everybody's equal, but it's a patriarchy. But they're saying it's, and then at the maidmen's ball, which is where we've talked about Petronius making sure he's clean to go there, hoping to get picked up. It says Petronius felt proud and disquieted simultaneously. He was pleased by the thought he had been picked up. He was home and dry. It's so well written. You in very, I mean, this is just 3 sentences. It sums up his disempowerment, that his whole life is aimed at getting this fatherhood protection, like to be picked up by one of the powerful in society, the owners, the women who have all the best jobs, the whole ideology, their needs are met. and everything's about them. And if he can possibly attract one and then get some form of protection from her, and this is the moment at the Maidman's Ball, he's being picked up in his home and dry. And then this is just again showing how some of the sort of awful situation that Petronius finds himself in. The woman who's picked him up leaves, and he goes back to the bar, and he notices all the Whim and Wolfram began to sing in harmony. There's nothing better than boys. Their peahos now are busting with joys. Now peahos are the like bags that men and all males from puberty onwards have to put their penises in, and they stick out they're very uncomfortable, and they stick out and they show everything about the penis to the whole of public. But this has been reversed and sexualized, so the women the Whim are shouting about how these peahos are bursting with joys. When you waltz through the night of lifelong delight, holding them tight, it should be tight, by the string of their kite. Boys are the best of life's toys. And that, this is showing how the matriarchy has ridiculed and demeaned males to be toys. And this is being sung at the ball where he's trying his best to get picked up. So it's so humiliating and horrific for him. Okay, back to you, Leah, on this one.
So Ruth is his mother, the very powerful, she's like in parliament. And then, Christopher is the husband. So Petronius's mother and father. And there's, these various scenes where they're having sex. And so in fact, it was some time since anything much had happened as far as he was concerned. Ruth, so the wife, the powerful woman, couldn't remember when he'd last had an orgasm. She kept at it on top of him, evenly and rhythmically. That was the best thing. He never said no when she wanted to. Could she have found a more wonderful man-woman? So you can just flip this right around, and this is the state of so many women's lives is they can't say no to the men who want to have sex with them, whether it's husbands or boyfriends. They're not getting any sexual satisfaction out of it. And this is what men want, is just a woman who will never say no and, pleasure him and ask for nothing in return. So, poor Christopher just has to lie there and just do whatever she wants, even though he's exhausted and feels alienated and is getting nothing out of this experience. So a lot of us was very poignant. She did a good job at it. So
I think it's very convincing. I mean, the whole book is incredibly convincing about how you could have a matriarchy, you could have a system of total oppression of men. And part of a great thing about the book is that she very convincingly goes right into the sexual act, where women have sex on men. They use men who they've dominated and ridiculed to get sexual pleasure based on their own biology, their own sexual needs. And I mean, it's just genius the way that Brantenberg it sort of truly represents how females experience sex and enjoy sex, but then also sort of shows how demeaning, I mean, or I suppose that some physical bits of sex, but then it also portrays how men use women, and then does that role reversal here. So she is this thing Ruth couldn't remember when he last had an orgasm. She's so dominant that she forces her husband to have sex, or persuades him, and it doesn't really matter to her that he doesn't enjoy it, which most men in Agalia don't enjoy. They just put up with it. Yeah, let's go on to another thing. So, okay, so this is going now on to what the country is like. So Egelsland is part of the wider sort of Norwegian, Scandinavian peninsula. And they say there's been a constant state of war between Agalia and the neighbouring country of Pax over the possession of these ore-rich mountains. For a long time now, however, the two countries had shared them sisterishly, each deriving great wealth from them. And so it's explained to us how the whole country and the system, the relationships between different countries, it's a matriarchy, and the nation states are built around sisterhood. And then it says, on the southern Cape of Lux, there stood a stone statue depicting a fisher housebound looking anxiously out over to sea. So the term housebound is the term used for house husbands. And then there's the women go out fishing, and there's a statue of a housebound, so it's a man looking out to sea, looking anxiously. And then Petronius, who wants to be a fisher, he can't be because he has no fishing suit with a pea-hoe, and he can't do anything in public. To do anything in public without one would be inconceivable and unaesthetic. So there's the rationale for him not being allowed to be a fisherman is that he has to, there is no suit which has this penis hole sticking out, and it would be dangerous for him because there are these very, very dangerous fish in the sea that attack sharp objects. So they've sort of created this complete trap for him, like the bird cage, that's which you get this idea of how utterly totalitarian it is against Petronius. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next quotas brings in his character Spinnerman Almos. He is a teacher, and he never got fatherhood protection, so he's never married. He did have a son, but the woman who got pregnant with him rejected him and didn't give him fatherhood protection. So he's sort of outcast, but sort of he's allowed to teach. But he has to teach completely matriotic. Well, matriarchy in this case being really quite bad. The poetry to a class of disrespecting children, and the children are really vile to him, and he is quite confused in many ways. He has the sort of he ends up being a revolutionary and fighting back, but he's very confused because he's teaching everything that props up this horrific system which demeans him to children who sort of know what's going on and think is appalling. And then this is one of the things he says: nature's injustice consists of the fact that man Wom does not have the privilege of bearing children. This means that he has a purely subordinate function in the very process of life. So this is quite clever in the book, that we hear about the system of matriarchy through Spinnerman Almos, the teacher, the male teacher, who doesn't totally agree with it and is very ambivalent about having to teach it. So that's a good bit. And then we've got another quote. They're jumping about a bit, but it's good to give you, when you're hearing about the book, various things. This is Petronius goes out to see the sea, which he loves, and goes to sit in the forest, and gets caught by 3 women who rape him. And a bit of the rape scene, it says, he felt the cold metal against his stomach. She cut the waistband, pulled off the pea-hoe, that's his sort of bra type thing for his penis, and threw it away to one of the other women who caught it. She tore the cloth and threw it away. One was on top of him now. She smelt of alcohol and sweat. She grabbed his penis and thrust her nipple into his mouth. He should say he felt a wet crotch against his thigh. And this again, I mean, it's just genius that she is reversing a rape scene very convincingly, how if we were in a vile matriarchy, it could be done, and it could be so horrific. You really feel for Petronius because he's already trapped in this horrific social and political system, and then he's being physically assaulted and raped, and it shows how that everything in society, it's all linked up. This moment of the insertion of the women sort of oppress men by inserting their nipples. Their nipples are a sort of a bit like penises. They quite often talk about their erect nipples and it's traumatizing for him because it symbolizes the whole of his oppression. And then he failed to conceal the rape from his parents. His mother, when his mother finds out about it, she says usually an incident of this sort would go straight to the Directorate's Department of Violent Crime. But since you are my son, you'll be spared. You'll have virtually no chance of getting fatherhood protection. It would be, and then it's all about her. It would be humiliating for me, by the way, at the office. So rather than worrying about her son, she starts to worrying about her social position. And then she says, "We won't report it, Petronius. Let's forget the whole thing." It's such a brilliant role reversal. I mean, this is what happens to women all the time. It becomes about their father's status, their husband's status, and it would be embarrassing to them. And very little is said. You know, they're going to forget about it, how much it might have traumatized him. Right. So back to you, Leah.
So there's this whole ideology that supports the matriarchy and why women are on top and why men have to be subordinate. And she does this really brilliant job of creating this whole ideology that would work to subordinate men. And you just see how absurd the whole thing is, because of course we live in the exact opposite. So she's done this really brilliant job of creating this ideology based on nature and evolution and whatever, that it sort of firmly puts the thing in place, sort of, cosmically. So this is one of the things they're taught at school. These are the lessons they're getting about why the society is the best it could possibly be, and why that means men have to oppress women. So, so nature sometimes exhibits a great divine wisdom. The most important sexual organs in the human race, the womb's sexual organs, are therefore in a protected position inside her body. This shows us that it would be more serious for a womb to injure her sexual organs than for a man womb to do the same. He therefore carries his externally, since we can't say it really matters very much what happens to them. That is why the man womb is called the vulnerable sex. He uses these organs of his to squirt infinite numbers of sperm into the womb's body. So again, she's taken, just biological facts of mammalian reproduction, but she turns it into this hierarchy, which of course is exactly what patriarchy does. And then, there's all these ideological justifications for the fact that women have all the power. So I just think this makes it very, very clear how patriarchy does the exact same thing and how silly the whole thing is, because it's all just a justification. None of it is like written in stone. So next slide. And then this part was kind of funny. So this part of, again, the justification, but she compares men womb to sperm. So the sperm is allowed to live. There's a good analogy in this. An analogy is something which is like something else. The man womb needs a home. On his own, he is by definition homeless. In looking for a home, he has to compete with hundreds of other men womb. When he finds one, the womb keeps him there, provides him with nourishment, and protects him against all harm. So this is like the right wing, what the right wing offers women on our planet. This is what is offered to men in this matriarchy, that they have to find a good woman who will keep them safe and protect them and protect their honor and give them fatherhood protection, is what it's called, and acknowledge him, as the impregnator of, the father of the child, and then, give him a safe place to live. Because the world is cruel and vicious and awful, and men just don't matter that much. Just like there's millions of sperm and only one of them gets to be special. That's the condition of men, of men womb in this planet, is that they just don't matter very much, and you're very, very lucky if you get chosen. So this is like, how we talked about, he saw the statue of the, looking out to sea, and this whole longing in the beginning of the book is that he wants this life where he gets to have adventure at sea. And he's a teenager, and so he still has these longings to be his own self, and to pick his own life, and to have, some kind of agency over what he's going to do. And everything is just closed off to him, just bit by bit. So his mother actually takes pity on him and says, all right, you really, really want to be a sailor. We're going to have to find a special suit for you so that you can, be a deep sea diver. And she has a friend of hers who's an engineer make the first suit ever that has a piho. Now, the idea that they could have a suit that didn't have a piho is unthinkable. And the mother even says to him, that's just disgusting. The idea that that thing would just be dangling there without, its little cage just is just repugnant and reprehensible. So it's unthinkable. You're not just going to get a regular suit, but I will figure out a way to try to help you. I'm going to get this special suit made. So it's his birthday, and the suit now arrives. So he's looking at the suit now as they've unwrapped it for him. He felt his cheeks grow warm. He knew immediately, as he stood there with everyone waiting for him to gush with wild and boundless enthusiasm and gratitude, that he would never wear this diving suit. The longer he looked at it, the more it became a living monster, an amoeba-like organism that would devour him. It was terrible. All his seawoman's swagger and toughness had disappeared. The little reinforced piho became a giant tower, open to attack by every conceivable monster of the deep. And then a few paragraphs later, he runs off. He's so upset. He runs off to his room and starts crying by himself. He sat there with his elbows on his desk, resting his chin on his hands. His eyes burned. He was trembling all over. He didn't want to talk to them. He never wanted to talk to them again as long as he lived. How could he look them in the face and be his usual self after this? Didn't they understand that he could never put on that diving suit? It wasn't a diving suit. It was a clown's outfit for Menwim, just as clownish as all the other clothes Menwim had to wear. Why should they be forced to be clowns even underwater? Why should they always be persecuted everywhere they went for having that thing between their legs? So this is that moment, right, in every teenage girl's life where you realize that you're never going to be free of this. Your life is just closing off around you into this cage. It's always going to be humiliating to have a female body. You just wanted to be human. You wanted to be able to, pick your path in life, and you can't. You're not allowed. You're always going to be public property. Your body is the one that's shameful. And he's just devastated by this experience. And he stops dreaming of being a sailor at that point because he realizes he's never going to get to do it. That even if he puts on this horrible suit, he'll never just be human. He's always going to be this other thing, this sort of slightly monstrous being, because of his reproductive organs. So it was very poignant reading this part of the book.
Yeah, I'll add that. I mean, I find it's so moving, and it's talking about our experiences that we have. There are so many moments like this. It's just a brilliant book. As you're reading it, you sort of kind of access these ideas and these feelings in a different way because of the reversal. It's almost like we're trapped to not be able to feel for ourselves or to feel the horrors, whereas this opens it up, or certainly for me, I think I've read it 3 times. I've always been able to understand more and also feel more compassion for myself when this happened to me. And I guess that it sounds as if for many of us who are reading it, there are really important moments as you're reading it. Let's go on to your next slide. Okay, here we are.
Oh yeah, so this is more of the history of this country, of this world, and so this is the world building that she does to explain it all, the sort of the ideology. During the Great Growth Age, Agalia was very much a field, so instead of a male, it's a field society. Public life was wholly dominated by women. Women were considered second-class citizens, and Growth Age Agalians considered that their most important function was the breeding of children. They did not have equal status with women in the home in the way they do today. They were only admitted to the company of women for the purpose of engendering children, nor were they all permitted to father children. All boys had their fate sealed at the 10 sorting. Each year in the spring, all boys of 10 were brought before a panel of judges who decided whether they were to become studs or workers. Only 10% were chosen as studs. The rest were sent to Peluria to work in the mines and workshops, or else into the great wilderness to cut timber. We know very little about life for Menwim in Peluria and the wilderness regions, since written sources are lacking. We can only conclude that life must have been dismal. We know somewhat more about how the studs lived, since they had frequent contact with society. They were kept in a reservation consisting of a row of big tents. They were only permitted outside the reservation on rare occasions. It was the whim who went to them, usually in large groups, on the eve of feast days after drinking wine. So this is supposed to say, oh, things were so much worse for you before. Now things are so much better because we have this basically egalitarian society, and you do have choices and you do have rights. So things are better. So why are you complaining? Everybody has choice. And gosh, most men just choose to be house husbands. So this is, that sort of, again, that sort of ideological sort of, cage that the boys are learning about in school.
Let's get another one. Right, here's another quote.
So I just thought this was funny because they have this sort of leftist entree into what they're creating as we would call feminism, and they call masculism. So they're doing consciousness raising, and they're trying to figure out, why do our lives suck so much? So Baldrian is like his best friend. Petronius, Baldrian took his hands. Where's all this? What's all this about more definite structures? So she, being his girlfriend, Grow, the one that picked him up at the ball, he's totally in love with her, the way that girls are sort of trained to have this whole, like, huge endorphin rush when a man pays attention to them, and their whole lives revolve around it. So he's totally in love. And of course, she's way older than he is. So that this is Grow. And she's this like hyper leftist, um, you know, very sort of cool, radical woman who that's taken him up as her little pet. So she, meaning Grow, wants us to organize study groups in the Menwin's movement to study Clara Sparks's work. So instead of Karl Marx, they have Clara Sparks, who's this big, theorist who talks about class society and how bad it is. And so Grow, of course, is sort of diverting their very righteous male rage about their situation and saying, no, no, we have to study class instead of your actual situation. So Fandango, who's another one of the young boys, banged the table with his fist. It was a gesture he had recently learned. So he's coming into his rage. He was tired of exhibiting that mildness expected of men Wim. Wim always want everything tied down to structure before they do anything. We had exactly the same discussion with Wolfram before he left the movement, and he got everything he said from Anna Bentridge. I've read Clara Sparks. I was bright and radical, so I read her works, but they're not about Menwim. They'd be fine if Menwim didn't exist, but we do. So they want their own theory. It's not enough just to study economic class. They want a theory that explains why they are oppressed. So this is that moment for them. Okay, next slide. So this is that older man who's their teacher. He's also joined this more radicalizing movement of the male feminist movement. So he holds out his son to Cyprian, and Cyprian is his actual son that he was never allowed to raise because he wasn't chosen for fatherhood protection. But he's seen him from a distance and has always longed, to be his actual father, to be able to raise him, and he's never been allowed to do that. So he reaches out to Cyprian across the round table, and Cyprian clasped it. The others felt they were witnessing something terribly private. At the same time, they had been saying to one another all the time that it was the revelation of the deepest and most painful things in life that were the very source of the Men Wims movement. So this is the personal as political. They're realizing that all there's this huge well of pain that they all have, and it's political. It's been created by this structure that puts women on top.
Right, brilliant. Well, I'm going to stop sharing now and get Tonje back on. And it's a shame because there's so much in the book that it'd be quite nice to get. Well, we've got loads more slides we could do, but it's also would be really great to hear from you, Tonje, and then we can carry on discussing various elements of it. Yeah. So Tonje, what thoughts have you got on the book, and what do you like about it, etc.? And you're muted.
It's a lot of the similar thoughts you have, and it's a long time since I read it, but it was really emotional, and it revealed the first thing was like I got this huge sympathy towards myself and my experience as a girl and young woman in the world. And secondly, it was that all boys and men have to read this book because it reveals experience they are not able to comprehend or feel without this book, in a way, because it's impossible to tell men things they can't experience, in a way. But this book gives the possibility to understand the
And
oppression.
I heard that, I mean, I don't know if it was Norway, but I heard that there was a time, maybe in the 1990s, that all teenagers, and I thought it was Sweden, but teenagers in a Scandinavian country were reading it at school. Everybody read it at school. Like we in Britain would read Gulliver's Travels or 1984, some sort of dystopian novels. Is that true that teenagers all read it?
Yeah, I think so, and that's how, I mean, when I was in school, Gerd Brantenberg visited the school and talked about that book and other books. So it was like a time in, I think it was it was when I was about 16, 17, where you had like Gerd Brantenberg coming to talk about this book, and we read the book. And also we had like a woman who was fighting prostitution came to the school. So it was like consciousness about the damage of society and patriarchy, and also how to use pictures and culture and literature to make us understand this.
And how, oh, and there's a thing here from Bodil from Sweden saying in Sweden it was definitely an important book and it came up in schools. I don't know if it was mandatory, but it was definitely known. I mean, I think it really should be mandatory in all schools all over the world, because it would help change things quite significantly, and it's really quite accessible. I think because it is quite harsh. I think possibly not for very young kids, because I suppose because of the rape scenes and stuff, but maybe 15, like when you were 15 or 16.
Yeah, I think I was like I was 16, and it was and I think all the boys at the same age would I think they, because in my school we also had discussions about it, so it's like to talk about it and to get the young men to understand this is how the society we live in today is. And I think it's all this body experience also, which is like you said, which is like your body smells bad. It's not you have to hide everything. It's like, I think this experience is so accessible for young men in this book. So I think it would really change their understanding of why feminism, why do we want to change things, and all this. Why do our self-esteem, why is it so not good? And yeah, I think it would really, I think it should be, it would change lots of the understanding of young men. So I think it should be something everybody have to read in school.
Yeah, I mean, there's a, go on.
Well, I just wondered, like you said you read it in school as a teenager. Did it affect you? And did it affect your friends? And then, the young boys who read it, the teenage boys, did you see like their minds start to get it at all? Like, oh, this is what it must be like for women. Did it have an impact, do you think?
I truly don't. I was so I mean, hormones and everything. So I had so much enough with myself. But for me, it was like healing in a way. And I could give myself some kind of tenderness. So it's like, but the puberty was like hell. So I can't remember others. I just remember my own things. So I
Well,
don't.
I've been surprised about it. So I've tried to get young women to read it, and I've given it to young women, and I've given it also to a librarian who is very, very in touch with young women's all their books. So the young women I've given it to have not managed to get beyond 15 pages, whereas they have read, say, Sheila Jeffries' Beauty and Misogyny or Andrea Dworkin, Women Hating, and have liked them. So in a strange way, they're more accessible. This book isn't engaging. And then the librarian I gave it to, who's like, I said, I think you should buy it and give it to all the, you should make sure all the girls in your library read it. She said, it's very dark and it's too extreme. And that was a couple of years ago. And that's a worry I have, because I would say if you are watching this and you haven't read it, you definitely should read it. But I think it might be worth it us trying to see if it's possible for younger women these days to read it, because my feeling is that it might be difficult. They might find it harder to read, and there might be those barriers that culture has now created that we found it very easy to read, I think, in the day, but it looks as if it's dropping off a little bit.
But I think it's about it should be read in school, and I think the context, like the teacher should talk about why should we read it, and why it gives another So I think it's possible to, by explaining things, because I also remember that I think even earlier when I was like 14, 13 or something, we saw this film, The Wave. Do you remember that? Yeah, but that was like a teacher had an experiment with his pupils, like where half of where the pupils ended up being mean, really mean, almost terrorizing the other pupils because they were feeling they did their good thing. So we were like exposed to lots of things that should, the intention was like to give us a frame of how any person could be like a bad person, or like how society actually works, and what can happen if you don't think on your own. So it was, I mean, I can't remember anything of this was traumatizing. I was looking at Roots at television. That was traumatizing because it was pictures. But I think to talk about these things, it just gave me some kind of knowledge and understanding.
Yeah. I'm gonna get there's I'm just gonna share the screen to show, because it looks as if we've probably got time to share. This is another quote that you got, Lierre, and maybe would you be able to talk about this, because I think this is quite a nice bit of a positive bit to do with their liberation.
Yeah, so they decide that they're going to go to, there's a gay bar, and they're going to go there. And they arrive, and it's mostly women in the bar. There's not many men-women in the bar. So they're still feeling a little bit alienated, but they're very excited to have this big adventure where they're going to go to this bar. And one of the reasons they want to go there is that it's sort of come up in their consciousness raising group. Well, why do we give all this love and attention to women? Why can't we love each other in the same way? So they're like, well, let's just go to this bar and see what it's like. So Baldrian grasped Petronius by the shoulders and gazed at him with half-drunk, sparkling eyes brimming with tears. Isn't that what we are meant to do here? He drew Petronius towards him and kissed him. They laughed and threw their arms around each other, hugging each other tightly, kissing and laughing. No, was it possible? Was that what it was like? It was an unbelievably wonderful feeling. They hardly dared look at each other. They felt completely dizzy, holding each other tightly and smiling throughout their whole bodies. They forgot where they were and felt as though they had been lifted to some higher stratum of the atmosphere, weightless in each other's embrace. It was like nothing they had ever experienced in their entire long, wearisome youth. And then a little bit later on the same page, was that what it was like this, feeling another man-woman's body against one's own? Why had they never done it before? His arms around me, the music in the half-darkness, everything in the world was good. Baldrian, you're beautiful. Baldrian, I want to be with you. So here they are falling in love with each other and pulling their attention away from the women who have only exploited them, and realizing that, oh my goodness, we can fall in love with each other instead. So they have this beautiful moment in this with the music and in the bar. And it was just very sweet, like this, because so many women have done this exact thing, through feminism. So it was very
it's
sweet.
quite amusing, isn't it? Yes, I think we're all sort of laughing. there's some sort of joy in it. The book is definitely not just upsetting. It's really fun. There are lots of jokes in it, and there are lots of lovely high moments in it, which just they're really inspiring. So yeah, that's a nice bit of it. One thing I just want to bring up is right towards the end of the book, there's they've sort of discussed about how they might have a revolution and overthrow the bad matriarchy. And there's, in the last couple of chapters, there's the parliament, the women's parliament, people who are running everything. We've got this, I'll read this bit. The Lady Chancellor recited some figures which were greeted with applause. She's talking with other parliamentarians, and went on to quote statistics for the fisheries where the same principles were applied, which is sort of eco-green principles. The state of the fish stocks was given, and it was confirmed that the size of the catches was fully compatible with the preservation of stocks. She confirmed, with even more satisfaction, that there had been very little need to enforce the regulations, since it was of course obvious to any idiot that it would be absurd to catch more fish than were being spawned. Now, a really fun little twist, it was surprising twist, is at the end of the book, Gerd Brantenberg obviously has laid out how terrible this matriarchy is, but it's completely ecologically sustainable, because whilst the women were really bad in many, many ways and they were oppressing the men, they had totally sustainable balance with nature, and there was no pollution, there was no CO2. They knew about it. I mean, this is 1979, and it's mentioned in the book that you shouldn't do too many carbon dioxide emissions and deplete the fish stocks or use up too many resources. And I think that's a really, it's quite, I quite like it as a twist. She's saying, like, it's really awful, terrible, role reversal. But if we did have this society, at least one good thing is we wouldn't have destroyed the planet. We wouldn't be destroying the planet. And that fits with what you said, Tonje, that Gerd Brantenberg, who you just talked to or communicated with today, is saying it's a dystopia, but it's also a utopia. There are some things in it, some elements which are really utopian.
The very last slide that I made, I don't know if you can get that up. I can just read it from
Oh
the
yeah,
book, but it's
yeah, and I'll
the
get
same,
it if you
it's the
start
same.
reading.
It's literally how the book ends
Yeah.
is on that note. And I
Yeah.
thought that was very
Oh yes,
interesting.
I'll get
was
that. That's a really good quote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get it up. So it's coming up now.
No, Petronius, you see, men are never really in touch with life. They have no physical contact with their offspring, so they're not capable of considering what will happen to the people of the world when they themselves are dead. In a society where men were allowed to rule, all terrestrial life would die out. If men weren't kept down, if they weren't restrained, if they weren't civilized, if they weren't kept in their place, life would perish. And as always, Ruth Bram had the final word. And that's the end of the book. And here we are at the end of the world because men are in charge. So she's right about that.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, there are uncomfortable sort of thoughts after that, but it's nice that she put that in. So it just deepens it. There are loads of really sort of complex, deep ideas in it. All right, I'll have a look and see if there's a Q&A. Breakup link. I'm going to put the breakup link. So maybe if Tonje and Lierre, you say a final thing. If
Tonje, why don't you say the last word, because you know her.
Yeah,
Yes.
I don't know. I met her and talked and interviewed her, but I think it would be really nice to get her on later to talk about her books, because I mean, it's a genius idea and it reveals so many layers, and it's explains so much of society and girls, how we in a way often grow up hating ourselves, and I think just also she was like part of the women's house in Norway, and she was she was the lesbian movement. They the first lesbian movement was organized like at her cottage in 1975. So she was early on a lesbian, and I mean, she's so funny when she talks. She's a really good to express things, and both in a funny and interesting way. So yeah, I just I mean, I hope she will. Yeah, I think we should try to get in touch with her or with the eye and try to make her talk about her books, because it gives joy and knowledge to our minds and lives.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's do that, and we'll send this to her. And I'd like to say, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, Gerd, for writing this book. If you see this, and we'll definitely get in touch with you, and it would be amazing to talk to you. And also, we can look into your other books, because I don't know if anybody else has read them, but there are some other books that Gerd Brantenberg's written. So that's a really exciting sort of new step, and then also try to promote them to young, particularly girls, but young people in our countries. Okay, well, the breakout rooms for anybody who wants to go to them, and otherwise, see you next week. And thank you very much to Lierre, Tonje, and everybody who's been here. Okay, bye.